It was a Tuesday morning, coffee still hot in my hand. I walked the same path through the pines, down the red clay slope, out to my grandfather's shore. And I stopped dead. A fresh slab of concrete, size of a basketball court, still steaming in the cool morning air, poured directly onto my lakebed. Steel posts, a laminated sign, brand new, glossy. HOA Community Marina, property of Clearwater Ridge Homeowners Association. They didn't knock, didn't call, just poured. My coffee went cold. I didn't notice. That's when I heard heels on gravel. Beverly Drummond, cream linen blazer, 7 in the morning. She smiled like someone who'd already won.
Good morning. The community appreciates your patience.
I looked at the concrete, looked at her. Enjoy it, I said, while there's still water in it. What would you do? Drop your state in the comments. Where are you watching from? Let me take you back to 1962, because that's where this story really starts. My grandfather, Rutherford Rudy Calloway, was a millwright from western Tennessee who spent 32 years working the line at a paper mill, saving every dollar that didn't go toward feeding 6 kids. In the summer of '62, he bought 12 acres along the eastern shore of Lake Prescott, in a quiet county in central Georgia, back when you could still do that for what a used pickup truck costs today. He built a cabin with his own hands, tin roof, poured concrete porch, a wood-burning stove that smelled like cedar and pine resin every single winter. He fished that lake until he was 78 years old. When he passed, the property came to my father, Dale Calloway. And when Dale's knees got bad and the winters got long, it came to me, Prescott Calloway, named for the lake itself, because Rudy was the sentimental type. Here's the thing about that deed. It didn't just convey 12 acres of pine and Georgia red clay. It conveyed riparian rights, the legal right to use and control the water adjacent to your land. And it explicitly included the lakebed to the center line of Lake Prescott along our shoreline. 340 feet of it. My grandfather's lawyer, a meticulous old man named Harlan Fitch, had written it airtight. Rudy didn't trust banks, and he really didn't trust neighbors. Smart man. The Clearwater Ridge HOA didn't exist when Rudy bought that land. It was incorporated in 1988, after a developer named Garrett Whitmore came through, subdivided a chunk of the western hillside, put in 64 homes with vinyl siding and matching mailboxes, and slapped a covenant on all of them. The covenant gave the HOA authority over their lots, their fences, their paint colors, their grass height. Not my land. My land was never in the subdivision, never subject to a covenant. We were what's called a non-member parcel, completely outside HOA jurisdiction. I want you to hold on to that phrase, because it becomes the whole ball game. Now, the antagonist. Her name is Beverly Drummond, and she has been HOA board president for 11 consecutive years, which should be illegal in the same way it's illegal to let one person control a country for too long. She's 63, drives a cream-colored Cadillac Escalade, and wears linen blazers to informal neighborhood events. She has the specific energy of a woman who peaked as a middle school vice principal and has been chasing that high ever since. I first crossed paths with Beverly 3 years ago when I started spending more weekends at the cabin after my divorce. I was fixing up the dock, had a small John boat in the water, and was minding my business with a cold Sweetwater 420 in my hand when she materialized on the shore in those linen blazers, cream-colored, naturally, and informed me that I needed to register my watercraft with the HOA Marina Committee. I told her, politely, that I wasn't in the HOA. She blinked at me like I'd spoken Mandarin. Everyone on this lake is subject to the HOA Marina rules, she said. I pointed at my deed. She looked at it like it had personally offended her. That was the first act. She sent me a formal violation notice 2 days later, a $200 fine for unauthorized dock usage. I didn't pay it. She sent a second notice. I didn't pay that either. I sent her a copy of the deed with the relevant language highlighted in yellow, along with a 1-paragraph letter explaining, gently, that she had no authority over my property. She did not take that well. The next HOA board meeting, I later found out, lasted 3 hours. The last item on the agenda was titled, Calloway Parcel, Long-Term Strategy. That should have been my warning. The first escalation was bureaucratic, which is how Beverly liked to operate. She preferred paperwork the way some people prefer passive aggression. Clean, deniable, suffocating. About 6 months after the violation notice debacle, I got a certified letter from the county zoning office. Someone had filed a formal complaint alleging that my dock was encroaching on community waterway access and requesting a zoning review. The complaint was filed anonymously, but the letter referenced concerned neighbors, which, in a county where I had no enemies except one linen-blazered HOA president, wasn't exactly a mystery. I had to take a Tuesday off work, drive 2 hours to the county seat, and sit in a beige government office while a bored zoning officer named Gary reviewed my documents. Gary had the energy of a man who had been waiting for retirement since approximately 2009. He looked at my deed, looked at the complaint, looked at my deed again, and said, with the enthusiasm of someone reading a grocery list, "Complaint dismissed. Your riparian rights are clearly documented. You're free to go." 45 minutes of my life, 2 hours each direction, a tank of gas. I called it a win and went home. Grilled some catfish that evening. They were biting along the eastern shore, and told myself Beverly had spent her shot. People like her usually fired the one bureaucratic bullet they had, and then moved on to easier prey. I was wrong. Beverly Drummond did not have one bullet. Beverly Drummond had a magazine. The next move came in the form of the Lake Prescott Waterway Beautification Initiative, which the HOA voted to establish at their next board meeting. Its stated goal was to improve the aesthetic and navigational quality of the lake for all community members. Its actual goal, as I would later understand it, was to give Beverly a mechanism to harass anyone she wanted under the banner of beautification. Within 2 weeks of the initiative's founding, I received a notice, not from the county this time, but from the HOA directly, informing me that my dock was aesthetically non-compliant with new beautification standards, that my John boat was an eyesore inconsistent with community values, and that I had 30 days to either upgrade my facilities to HOA specifications or remove them entirely. The specifications they attached required all docks to be constructed of composite decking in one of 3 approved colors, required all watercraft to be registered with the Marina Committee, required a $450 annual lake stewardship fee payable to the HOA. I want to be clear, none of this applied to me, not one syllable of it. I was not in the HOA, I had no covenant, I had no obligation, but I was starting to understand that Beverly wasn't trying to win on legal grounds. She was trying to exhaust me. She was betting that enough notices, enough certified letters, enough Tuesday drives to the county seat would eventually make me throw up my hands and either comply or sell. The catfish smell on my hands that Tuesday evening, the char of the grill, the sound of the water lapping against my grandfather's dock boards, they kept me grounded. This is Rudy's land. This is my land. I sent back a letter, short this time, 3 sentences. I am not a member of the Clearwater Ridge HOA. I am not subject to HOA regulations or fee schedules. Please direct future correspondence of this nature to my attorney. I didn't have an attorney yet, but that sentence costs nothing to write, and it changes the temperature of every interaction instantly. Beverly went quiet for about 6 weeks. I thought maybe that had done it. Then, on a Thursday evening in early April, my neighbor 2 lots down, a retired railroad engineer named Thaddeus Burke, who I'd come to know over shared fence lines and fishing spots, called me with the kind of voice a man uses when he's delivering bad news slowly. "Prescott," he said, "you need to come down to the lake." "What for?" "They're surveying," Thad said. "Got stakes in the ground and everything, on your side of the water." I set down my coffee. It was evening coffee, the Georgia kind, and I listened to it go cold on the counter while Thad explained that a 3-person survey crew had been working along my shoreline for most of the afternoon, placing orange stakes every 20 feet along the lakebed. The crew told Thad they were conducting a community infrastructure assessment. They had clipboards, they had a transit level, they had a white truck with no company markings on the doors. Takeaway: when someone sends unmarked surveyors onto adjacent property without notifying you, photograph every stake, every crew member, every vehicle plate. Do it immediately. I drove down that night, took pictures of everything by flashlight, the orange stakes glowing in the beam, the mud still soft and smelling of algae and lake water. I counted 14 stakes, evenly spaced, running exactly along the center line of my lakebed rights. Whoever was surveying knew exactly where my boundary was, and they were planning something just inside it. I hired the attorney on a Friday. Her name was Constance Miles, Connie, a property rights specialist out of Macon who had a wall full of plaques and the specific bearing of a woman who had seen every flavor of HOA overreach and found all of them tedious. She wore reading glasses on a chain and had the habit of clicking her pen 3 times before she spoke, like she was chambering a round. She reviewed my deed in about 12 minutes. "Your grandfather's lawyer was thorough," she said, which from Connie was approximately the equivalent of a standing ovation. I told her about the survey stakes. She didn't look surprised. She looked like someone who was watching a chess game unfold and already knew which piece was about to get sacrificed. "They're going to claim adverse possession," she said, "or they're going to try to establish a prescriptive easement. Either way, they need to demonstrate continuous, open, hostile use of the land over a statutory period." I asked her what that meant in plain English. "It means they want to use your property long enough, openly enough, that a court might eventually consider it theirs." Click, click, click. "It won't work. Your deed is too specific, your objections are documented, and you've never given them permission. But they're going to try to create a record of use before you can stop them." That call came on a Thursday. Connie sent a formal cease and desist letter to the HOA on Friday morning, citing the specific Georgia statutes governing riparian rights, adverse possession requirements, and trespass law. It was 3 pages long. I read every word of it twice. It was, genuinely, a beautiful document, the legal equivalent of telling someone exactly where they stand, while being technically polite about it. The HOA received the letter on Monday. They poured the concrete on Wednesday. I want you to sit with that for a second. They received a cease and desist letter from an attorney, citing the specific statutes under which their activities constituted trespass, and their response was to accelerate. I got the call from Thad at 7:15 in the morning. I was still in my pajamas. He said, "They've got trucks down here, Prescott, concrete mixers. They started at 6. I drove 40 minutes with my jaw clenched so hard I could hear my teeth. By the time I got there, they had already poured roughly 2,800 square feet of concrete directly onto the lakebed, my lakebed, in a rough rectangle about 80 feet wide and 35 feet deep from the waterline. The concrete was still gray and wet at the edges, steam rising off it in the cool morning air with that sharp mineral smell of fresh cement. They'd embedded steel posts along the outer edge, 6 of them, already bolted to anchor plates. On 2 of the posts, they'd zip-tied laminated signs. HO a community marina, authorized users only. Beverly was there. She was wearing, I am not making this up, a cream linen blazer, even at 7 in the morning. She saw me coming across the grass, and she stood up straighter, like she was expecting a fight she'd already won. "Good morning, Prescott," she said. "As of this morning, the HOA has established a permanent community marina facility on the lakebed adjacent to Section 12 of Clearwater Ridge." "That's my lakebed," I said. "The board has determined that the relevant section of the lakebed falls under community navigational rights." Connie Miles sent you a letter on Friday. The board reviewed the letter and disagreed with its conclusions. The concrete was already hardening. I could smell it, that flat chemical smell mixing with the organic rot and mint of the lake water. I counted 6 dock slip markers already staked into the wet pour. There was a truck still idling at the top of the access road, its diesel exhaust hanging in the morning air, engine ticking over like it was waiting for orders. I looked at Beverly. She looked at me. She had the smile of someone who had just moved a chess piece and was waiting for you to realize you were in check. "You should talk to your attorney," she said pleasantly. "I'll do that," I said. I took 47 photographs. I measured the pour with a tape measure from my truck. I collected a chip of the concrete from the edge, still soft enough to dent, in a Ziploc bag. I drove to a FedEx office, printed 6 copies of every photo, time-stamped, and overnighted a set to Connie before I'd even had breakfast. Takeaway: when someone commits trespass in the form of physical construction, document obsessively before they can claim the area is established. Timestamps, measurements, and physical samples are evidence. And then I went home and I started thinking. Because Beverly had just made a significant strategic error. She thought pouring concrete was an act of dominance. She didn't understand that it was also an act of permanence, and permanent things are vulnerable in ways that paperwork isn't. My grandfather bought the Lakebed, and I own the water rights upstream. Here's the thing most people don't know about lakes. They don't maintain their own water level. Not the artificial ones, anyway. Lake Prescott was impounded in 1941 when the county dammed up Prescott Creek to create a flood control reservoir. And the control structure, the valve house, the spillway, the concrete riser that regulates how much water stays in the lake, that infrastructure belongs to whoever holds the upstream water rights. In 1962, when Rudy Calloway bought his 12 acres and his lakebed rights, he also acquired something that neither the HOA nor Beverly Drummond had apparently ever thought to look for in the deed: a water control easement over the county's original impoundment structure, granted because his land abutted the inlet channel. I didn't know that either, actually. Not yet. But let me tell you what did happen in Escalation 3, because first things first. After the concrete pour, Connie filed an emergency injunction in Superior Court, requesting an immediate halt to further construction and a removal order for the existing pour. The judge, a methodical man named Beauchamp, who ran his courtroom like a high school civics class, reviewed the filing and granted a partial temporary restraining order. No further construction, pending a full hearing. But he declined to order the existing concrete removed until the ownership question was fully adjudicated, because, as he put it, physical removal creates irreversible conditions that the court is reluctant to impose without complete record. So the concrete stayed, which meant the marina stayed, which meant 2 weeks after the pour, the HOA started using it, installing floating dock sections, painting slip numbers, and reserving spaces for dues-paying members. They hung string lights. They brought in a floating tiki bar for an HOA welcome to summer party. The string lights reflected on the water from across the lake when I sat on my porch in the evenings. And I want to tell you those lights smelled like victory to Beverly Drummond. She even sent me an invitation to the party, hand-delivered. I assume that was intentional. Meanwhile, Connie was doing what good attorneys do, digging. She requested the original HOA incorporation documents, the developer's subdivision plat, all recorded easements on Lake Prescott, and the county's original impoundment and water rights records from 1941. She called me on a Tuesday evening. Her voice had a quality I hadn't heard from her before. It was almost amused. "Prescott," she said, "I need to read you something from the 1941 County Water Control Agreement." "Okay." She read me a clause. It was dense, legal language, but the core of it was this: the party holding the water control easement on the inlet channel, which, through Rudy's 1962 deed and an unbroken chain of title, was me, had the right, under specific conditions of overuse or unauthorized encroachment, to reduce the operational water level of Lake Prescott by up to 4 feet for purposes of maintenance, restoration, or protection of water rights. 4 feet. At current lake levels, that meant the HOA's brand new marina would be sitting in approximately 8 inches of water. The floating docks would ground out. The slip markers would be embedded in mud. Every boat currently moored in the new community marina would be going exactly nowhere. Connie let that land for a second. "That's real?" I said. "It's been in the county record since 1941, she said. "Nobody's looked at it in decades because nobody's ever had reason to use it." Click, click, click. The condition of unauthorized encroachment has now been comprehensively documented. You have 47 photographs, a chip of the concrete, Thaddeus Burke as an eyewitness, and a violated cease and desist letter. The question isn't whether you have the legal right to do this. She paused. The question is whether you want to. I sat on my grandfather's porch. The string lights on the HOA marina glittered across the water. A boat engine turned over somewhere in one of the slips, someone heading out for an evening cruise, probably toasting the new facility, probably thinking about what a great president Beverly Drummond was. The wood planks under my feet were original to the cabin. 60-plus years of Georgia summers, rough sawn and honest under my boots. Takeaway. Before assuming you have no recourse, pull every document in your property's chain of title. Water rights, easements, and historical agreements are often overlooked assets with real power. "Yeah," I said, "I want to." Let me walk you through what Connie found, because the full picture is even better than the headline. The 1941 Prescott Creek Impoundment Agreement was a three-party document between the county, the original landowner on the eastern shore, a man named Elias Brantley, who sold to my grandfather 21 years later, and a federal agricultural drainage board that no longer existed. The agreement created the lake, established the spillway control structure on the eastern inlet, and assigned maintenance responsibility and control rights to the eastern shoreline parcel as a permanent easement running with the land. Running with the land. In property law, that means it transfers with every deed, automatically, in perpetuity. When Elias Brantley sold to Rudy Calloway, the easement came with the land. When Rudy deeded it to my father, the easement came with it. When Dale Calloway signed it over to me, there it was, sitting in a county records office for 80 years, unnoticed. The specific language Connie found was extraordinary. The water control easement not only granted the right to reduce lake levels for encroachment protection, it also established that any structure placed on the eastern lakebed without written consent of the easement holder was subject to a legal concept called continuing trespass, which in Georgia generates a fresh legal cause of action every single day the structure remains. Every day the concrete sat there, it was a new trespass. Every day was a new damages clock starting. So while the HOA thought they were moored in safe harbor, they were actually running up a tab in real time. But here's the part that made me laugh out loud, alone on the porch, at about 10 o'clock on a Tuesday night. Connie also found, buried in the HOA's own incorporation documents from 1988, a section that Garrett Whitmore's lawyers had included, probably as boilerplate, probably without thinking, establishing that the HOA was financially liable for any costs arising from unauthorized use of adjacent non-member parcels, including restoration costs, legal fees, and damages assessed by a court of competent jurisdiction. Whitmore had essentially preloaded the HOA's incorporation with a liability mechanism for exactly this situation. The HOA's founding documents contain the legal provision that would eventually be used to dismantle them. Connie estimated, conservatively, that between continuing trespass damages, removal costs for the concrete, and potential punitive awards, the HOA was already looking at exposure somewhere north of $300,000, and climbing by roughly $500 a day. They had been pouring for 4 days before the TRO stopped them. They had been operating the marina for 11 days. The math was not in their favor. There was one more thing Connie found, and this one she almost didn't tell me because she said she didn't want me to get too excited. The HOA's marina had been operating without a state-required marina operating permit. In Georgia, any facility offering more than 2 boat slips for rent or lease, even to HOA members, requires a State Environmental Protection Division marina permit, which involves an environmental impact assessment, including an assessment of the lakebed substrate. They had poured concrete on a protected substrate, were operating an unpermitted marina, and had done so in violation of a formal cease and desist. The EPD, Connie told me, tends to take the permitting issue very seriously. She had already drafted the complaint. I made myself go to bed that night. Tomorrow was going to take a clear head. The next 2 weeks were the most deliberately methodical of my life. I have spent most of my career in civil infrastructure. I manage construction projects for a living. And the thing that work teaches you is that execution is everything. You can have the best plan in the world. If you execute it sloppy, you lose. So I was not sloppy. Let me walk you through the architecture of what we built. The first pillar was legal. Connie filed 3 simultaneous actions. The continuing trespass suit in Superior Court, citing the lakebed deed and the daily damages doctrine. A formal complaint with the Georgia Environmental Protection Division regarding the unpermitted marina, and a letter to the State Attorney General's Consumer Protection Division regarding the HOA's pattern of harassment against a non-member property owner. Each filing was independent. Each created its own pressure vector. The goal was not to win on one front. It was to make Beverly fight in 3 directions at once with a volunteer board and a shared legal fund. Takeaway: multi-front legal strategy exhausts a financially limited opponent faster than any single lawsuit, because each front requires separate time, energy, and money to defend. The second pillar was the water. Working with a licensed hydrological engineer named Foster McAllister, a deliberate, soft-spoken man who smelled permanently of coffee and waterproof paper, I documented the full exercise of my water control easement, filed the required 30-day notice of intent with the county, which the 1941 agreement mandated before any level change, and submitted the formal easement exercise request. Foster calculated the drawdown. At the spillway's operational range, I could reduce lake levels by a sustained 3.8 feet over a 72-hour controlled release, enough to drain approximately 60% of the navigable water from the HOA Marina area, enough to leave every moored boat sitting on wet clay. This was not sabotage. This was a documented, legally grounded exercise of a valid easement for the express purpose of preventing continuing trespass on my lakebed. Every form was filed. Every box was checked. The County Water Management Office reviewed and approved the notice. The 30-day clock started. The third pillar was the community. What Beverly had never understood about people like Thaddeus Burke, retired, deeply rooted, connected to every old family in the county, is that they have long memories and longer phone trees. Thad had been watching the HOA operate for 15 years. He knew which members were unhappy, which ones had been bullied over fence colors and holiday decorations, and which ones privately thought Beverly had long ago overstepped every reasonable boundary. Over coffee, over back fence conversations, over quiet dinners with people whose names I probably shouldn't print here, Thad assembled something that doesn't have a clean legal name, but functionally looked like a block. A group of HOA members, about 17 of them, who were prepared to show up at the next HOA annual meeting and vote. Vote for new board members. Vote against continued legal expenditure on the Callaway situation. Vote for a resolution to negotiate a settlement. HOAs run on quorum rules. When 17 members of a 64-unit association decide to show up with unified intent, that's more than 25% of the vote. Enough, under Clearwater Ridge's own bylaws, to force a special session and demand a financial accounting. Thad organized this with the calm efficiency of a man who had spent decades coordinating rail schedules. I mostly stayed out of the way and provided coffee. The fourth pillar was media. This one was smaller, but precision-targeted. A reporter named Gideon Marsh at the regional paper had written a previous story on HOA overreach in a neighboring county. I had Connie send him a document package: the deed, the survey photos, the concrete pour documentation, the EPD complaint, with an embargo: hold until I give you the go-ahead. Gideon read everything, called me once, asked 3 good questions, and said he'd be ready when I was. I told him the 30-day clock ran out on a Saturday. I suggested he keep that Saturday free. The thing about a plan built across multiple pillars is that none of them need to be spectacular on their own. The legal filings were, by themselves, just filings. The water easement, by itself, was just a form. The block, by itself, was just a group of neighbors. But assembled together, timed to execute simultaneously, that becomes something else entirely. That becomes the kind of morning that people remember for a long time. I spent the last few days before the clock expired fishing. The catfish were running again along the eastern edge, in the shallows near the concrete, which even the fish seemed to have mixed feelings about. I sat in my John boat, the familiar creak and rock of it, and I waited. Beverly was not idle during the 30-day notice period. She figured out, through channels I still haven't fully traced, that something was coming. I don't know if she had someone watching my property, or if a county clerk said something, or if she was just operating on the paranoid instinct that comes from 11 years of low-grade power games. Whatever the source, she knew. And knowing made her dangerous in a new way. The first thing she tried was financial. About 10 days into the 30-day window, I received a letter. Not from the HOA, but from an attorney I'd never heard of, representing a company called Prescott Lake Development Partners, LLC. The letter informed me that Prescott Lake Development Partners had entered into a conditional purchase agreement with a member of the Callaway family for a portion of the subject property, and was therefore asserting an equitable interest that would need to be resolved before any water control actions could legally proceed. I read that letter 4 times. Then I called my father. "Dad," I said, "did you sign anything?" Long pause. "Some woman called me," he said. "Said she was from a property management company. Said she had some paperwork about updating the family property records." The documents Dale had signed, and bless his heart, he'd signed them without calling me, were framed as a family estate planning consent form. The actual effect, had it been valid, would have been to assign a conditional option on a corner parcel of the property to the LLC, creating the equitable interest the letter described. Dale is 71 and has macular degeneration. He reads with a 3x magnifier. Connie looked at the documents for about 8 minutes and then used language that I have never heard from her before or since. The short version. The documents were drafted in a way clearly designed to confuse a non-attorney. The LLC had been incorporated 4 days before the documents were sent, and its registered agent was Beverly Drummond's son-in-law. We filed a fraud complaint with the state bar the same afternoon, and Connie sent a letter to the mystery attorney explaining, with precision and barely contained fury, that any equitable interest claim arising from documents obtained through misrepresentation of a 71-year-old man with a documented visual impairment would be pursued as elder financial exploitation under Georgia law, which carries criminal penalties. The mystery attorney did not respond. The LLC's registered agent subsequently resigned from his position. The equitable interest evaporated. Takeaway. If you're engaged in a property dispute, make sure every family member who could be contacted about the property knows to forward any communication, no matter how innocuous sounding, directly to your attorney before responding. The second thing Beverly tried was reputational. A post appeared on the Clearwater Ridge neighborhood social media page, a Facebook group with about 200 members, alleging that I had threatened HOA members with property damage, that I had been verbally abusive to volunteers during the concrete pour, and that I was attempting to destroy the community's waterfront access for personal financial gain. The post did not name me, but described my property so specifically that it might as well have. I did not engage with the post. Connie sent the HOA's board a letter, noting that the post constituted defamation per se under Georgia law, and that if it was not removed within 48 hours, we would seek an injunction and add a defamation claim to the existing litigation. The post disappeared in about 6 hours. The third move was a surprise. Beverly requested an emergency meeting with me directly, suggesting she wanted to find a mutually agreeable resolution. I talked to Connie, who said to go if I wanted to, but to bring a recording device, say very little, and let Beverly do the talking. We met at a diner on Route 41. Beverly arrived in the Escalade, the linen blazer, a large iced coffee she didn't touch. She offered me $12,000 for a permanent easement across the Lakebed portion in question. $12,000 for 340 feet of Lakebed with documented riparian rights and an 80-year-old water control easement. We're at $300,000 in documented damages and climbing, I told her. And we haven't even gotten to the EPD fine schedule. She took a long look at her untouched iced coffee. The board authorized up to $45,000, she said. I'll see you at the annual meeting, I said. Have a good afternoon. I left first. The recording was clean, 23 days into the 30-day window. The final week before the drawdown was the quietest of the whole ordeal, on the surface. Underneath, it was moving fast. Beverly made one more attempt. She got a local council member named Fitch, no relation to Old Harlan, to call me personally and encourage a neighborly solution. Fitch was not hostile. He sounded more embarrassed than anything, like a man who'd been handed a task he didn't entirely want. I told him I appreciated the call, that I had no personal animosity toward any individual HOA member, and that my actions were a lawful exercise of documented property rights in response to a documented illegal trespass. I said it politely, and I meant it. Fitch thanked me, and I suspect went and had a quiet word with someone about how he'd ended up in the middle of this. The EPD inspector, a no-nonsense woman named Shayla Preston, came out on Thursday to assess the marina. She spent 2 hours on site, collected substrate samples from around the concrete pour, reviewed the impoundment records, and photographed the construction. She said nothing to me directly, except to confirm that she'd received Connie's complaint filing. The look she gave the concrete slab, however, was not the look of someone who was satisfied with what she found. On Friday, Foster and I walked the inlet channel together. Foster had the water control valve house key, which I'd requested from the county after establishing easement rights, and we walked the path from my property down to the structure twice. It was a concrete block building, about the size of a large garden shed, sitting at the head of the inlet, surrounded by willows and the particular mud and iron smell of slow-moving water. Foster explained the mechanics. The main gate valve controlled outflow through the spillway. Opening it by 60% over a sustained period would produce the 3.8-foot drawdown we'd calculated. It was not dramatic to look at, just a metal hand wheel on a valve stem, orange with rust at the collar. But it was real, and it worked, and it was mine to turn. We confirmed the timing. Saturday morning, 7 a.m. The notice to the county stipulated that the drawdown would begin at first light on day 31 and would proceed for 72 hours, during which time I requested the county place advisory signage at the boat launch, warning of reduced water levels. The county complied, because the county, as it turned out, had grown quietly tired of the HOA's creative interpretations of public waterway law. On Friday evening, Thad confirmed the block. 17 members confirmed for the HOA annual meeting, which happened. This part required no engineering on my part, just timing, to fall on Sunday, 2 days into the drawdown. The meeting was always held at the community center overlooking the lake. The view from those windows was, historically, rather pleasant. It would not be, on Sunday, quite as pleasant as Beverly remembered. I called Gideon Marsh Friday night. Saturday, I said. Be at the lake access road at 7. Should I bring a photographer? He said. If you want pictures of a very large concrete slab sitting in 8 inches of water, I said, then yes. He brought the photographer. That night, Friday, the last night before, I sat on the cabin porch for a long time. The string lights were on over the HOA Marina, as they were every evening now. I could hear the occasional sound of a dock line creaking, a boat bumping its slip. The smell of the lake at night, that layered, alive smell of algae and pine and something older underneath. The mineral smell of old water that doesn't move much. The boards of the porch were rough under my palms. Rudy Calloway had sat on this porch for 20 years. He'd watched that lake through every season, the summer glitter of it, the winter gray. He'd known every fishing spot by the shape of the shoreline, every bird that worked the cattails at the south end. He had no idea, when he bought this land and wrote that deed and shook Harlan Fitch's hand outside the county recorder's office, that one day, 60 years later, the words on that deed would matter quite this much. I thought about that for a while. Then I went to bed. 7 o'clock was early. At 6:48 in the morning, I walked the inlet path with Foster McAllister. The air was the particular cool of early Georgia summer, before the heat takes over. The dew-heavy, pine-sharp morning air that makes you feel like the day hasn't decided anything yet. Birds working through the willows, the sound of the creek murmuring through the inlet, that steady, cold water sound over gravel. At the valve house, Foster checked his readings one last time. He had a flow gauge, a depth marker he'd placed at the Marina end, and a waterproof notebook in which he recorded everything with mechanical precision. He nodded. At 7:03 a.m., I turned the hand wheel. It takes about 90 seconds for the change to reach the lake. The valve opens, the additional outflow cuts into the spillway, and the water level begins its slow, certain descent. You can't see it happen in real time. It's 4 inches an hour, the first hour, subtle, inevitable. Gideon Marsh and his photographer were on the shore access path, cameras out. Gideon had a press lanyard around his neck and the professional calm of a man who has covered county government long enough to appreciate when something genuinely interesting finally happens. By 9:30 a.m., the first floating dock sections in the HOA Marina were beginning to settle. Slightly awkward, slightly uneven. One boat owner, who came down to check his vessel, did a visible double take at the waterline, then crouched down and looked at his hull, then looked at the lake, then looked at his hull again. By noon, it was unambiguous. The lake was dropping at a pace that, by my calculation, would put the marina floor exposed by early Sunday morning. Floating docks were grounding out by midday Saturday. 3 boats that had been moored in the new slips had to be moved. Their owners, to their credit, were more confused than angry. And when Gideon interviewed 2 of them on the shore path, one man said, with genuine bemusement, "I don't know who owns what around here, but I'd sure like to find out." Gideon's story ran online at 4 p.m. Saturday. The headline was, "Bless him, concrete claims, water rights, and one stubborn deed, the Lake Prescott dispute that's draining more than just a marina." He had a pull quote from Connie on riparian law, a photograph of the concrete slab from above, and a photograph of the valve house. He did not identify me by name, we'd agreed on that, but the story was complete, accurate, and devastating in the way that only calm, thorough reporting can be. By Saturday evening, the story had been shared 340 times in Georgia County Facebook groups and picked up by 2 regional television stations, both of which sent cameras Sunday morning. Sunday, the HOA annual meeting. The community center had a large picture window facing the lake. The room held about 80 folding chairs, and for the first time in recent memory, they were all filled. 17 of Thad's block. Assorted other members who had read Gideon's story. 2 television cameras, Gideon himself in the back, and Connie, who had not been invited but was technically a member of the public, attending a non-confidential HOA meeting, and said so pleasantly when a board member asked her to leave. Beverly called the meeting to order. She had prepared a statement. She was 3 sentences into it when a woman in the 3rd row, one of the block members, a retired school teacher named Harriet Voss, raised her hand and invoked the HOA's bylaws provision for a floor motion before regular business. Specifically, a motion to call for an immediate financial accounting of legal expenditures related to the Lakebed matter. The motion required a second. It got 5. The vote was 31 to 14 in favor. The financial accounting, presented reluctantly by the HOA treasurer, showed $78,000 already spent on legal fees. The treasurer's face, as he read the number aloud, was the face of a man who had been unhappy about this for months, and was relieved someone had finally made him say it out loud. From the back of the room, visible through the picture window behind the board's table, the lake lay flat and low in the Sunday morning light. The HOA Marina concrete slab rising gray and definitive from 8 inches of remaining water. The grounded dock sections tilted at various dejected angles, not a single vessel afloat. Harriet Voss made a second motion, to begin settlement negotiations with the Callaway property immediately. It passed 38 to 7. Beverly Drummond did not speak again for the remainder of the meeting. She sat very still in her chair, her hands folded, her cream linen blazer immaculate and utterly beside the point. The handwheel was 8 inches of orange rust and physics. My grandfather's deed was 60 years of paper and patience. Play stupid games. The settlement was reached 11 weeks later. The HOA agreed to fund the complete removal of the concrete pour at their expense. Final cost, $41,000 in demolition and lakebed restoration, performed under EPD oversight. Pay $95,000 in damages, half of which covered my legal fees and half of which went into a fund I specified. Formally record a covenant amendment permanently acknowledging my property's non-member status and the lakebed riparian rights, and vote to transition Beverly Drummond off the board, which they accomplished through a special election in which she received 4 votes, all presumably from herself and 3 close allies. The EPD issued a $28,000 fine to the HOA for operating an unpermitted marina on a protected substrate. That fine was separate from the settlement. The elder fraud complaint against Beverly's son-in-law was resolved through a consent agreement. No criminal charges were filed, but the experience appeared to leave an impression. Beverly sold her house 8 months later and moved to a retirement community in Savannah. I heard this third hand, and I genuinely hope she's happy there. I mean that. This was never about her as a person. It was about a system that hands small amounts of power to people who aren't equipped to hold it accountably, and about what happens when someone decides to hold that line. My father, Dale, came down to the lake the first weekend after the lakebed was fully restored and the concrete was gone. They'd done a good job on the restoration, regraded the substrate, planted native aquatic vegetation along the cleared zone. The lake had returned to its normal level. The water was clear again along the eastern shore, the sandy bottom visible in the shallows. Dale sat in a chair on the original dock, the one his own father had built, the boards still rough and honest, and he fished. He didn't catch much. He didn't seem to mind. The light came off the water the way it does in the late afternoon in Georgia. That specific gold that makes everything look like a photograph worth keeping. Your grandfather would have handled this exactly the same way, he said. I didn't say anything. Some things don't need a response. Here's what I did with the $47,500 that remained from the damages fund after my legal fees were covered. I established the Rutherford Callaway Lake Stewardship Scholarship, administered through the County Community College, providing annual scholarships for students pursuing degrees in environmental science, water resource management, or land use law. First recipient was a 20-year-old kid from 2 counties over who'd been working summers at a landscaping company and wanted to study hydrology. We also partnered with the County Parks Department to establish a public fishing access easement on the southern end of my property, a path and a small dock, open to the public, free of charge, managed jointly with the county. Non-exclusive, non-commercial, just access. The way Rudy would have wanted it. The first public fishing day drew about 40 people, kids from town, a few older men with good tackle boxes and better stories, a young couple who'd never fished before and caught a bluegill on their 3rd cast and looked at each other like they'd discovered something true about the world. That's what land is for. That's what water is for.
You know what nobody talks about? The morning after. After the concrete came out, after the water came back. After Beverly's name got 4 votes out of 64 and she drove that Escalade out of Clearwater Ridge for the last time. Prince Scott didn't throw a party. He just walked out that red clay slope, sat on his grandfather's dock and fished. Same boards, same splinters, same water Rudy Calloway had been looking at since 1962. $95,000 in damages, $28,000 in EPD fines. 11 years of Beverly's iron grip on that neighborhood dissolved in one Sunday morning because 17 regular people finally showed up and said enough. But the part that stayed with me wasn't the money, it was the scholarship. Named after a millwright who spent 32 years on a factory floor to buy 12 acres of quiet water, now sending kids to study land and water rights. That's not revenge, that's permanence. Here's what I keep thinking about though. Beverly didn't come out of nowhere. Someone elected her. 11 terms, and most of those neighbors had no idea what was being done in their name until the legal bill hit $78,000. So before you tune out, when did you last actually read your HOA documents? Because somewhere in that closing paperwork is either a weapon or a trap. Most people never find out which. If this one hit close, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe for more, and drop your HOA story below. Small power, big damage, every single time.